All right. How are you today? Wonderful. All right. Good. Does someone want to see what's in the Wonderbox for me today? Yeah, go ahead. Oop, you're kind of pinned. All right, we have another book today, but I'm not going to quite read this one. I have some adult friends who are going to help me. This is called Yes, No. We decided there might need to be a maybe in there. And it's a first conversation about consent. I wanted to share this book just so that adults see it. There is this whole series called A First Conversation, and we have almost all of them now. And there's great little indexes or definitions in the back. So adults who are trying to learn and grow about how to talk about these things with kids. And there's some really great guides. So we've been printing those out, and they're going, we'll have them to check out after our OWL series is over. But does anybody know what the word consent means? It's a really tricky word. What does consent mean, Sophia? Asking permission before you do something. And now, when I was growing up, we learned no means no. Anybody else here learn that? Okay, so sometimes when we learn better, we do better. We've started to shift now from no means no to yes means yes. So if someone says maybe, is that a yes or a no? Is it a yes? Right. So yes means yes. So consent should be really enthusiastic. And another thing is consent is not an ongoing thing. So just because last week Holly was okay with me sitting next to her, right? I might need to ask her this week if it's okay. Could I sit next to you today? Thank you. But if she didn't want me to, Holly, do you think it'd have been okay to say no to me? Yeah. It's really hard for kids to say no to grown-ups. So we as grown-ups need to own that if a kid says no, if a kid says maybe, then that means no. And sometimes we feel like we see these people here and we love them and we care about them. And so they should love to get a hug and a warm embrace. But sometimes I'm a little touched out. I'm not feeling it today. It doesn't mean I don't care about you. It just means I don't want to be touched today. Does that happen to anybody here? Yeah, it happens to me all the time. Any grown-ups, does that happen to you? Because kids, I do have news for you. Sometimes your grown-ups don't want to be touched either. So you need to ask consent, right? And this is something called boundaries, right? And so when we have good boundaries, then when we say, I'm okay going to play with you, but I don't want to do this, right? Or I don't like doing that, then it makes it easier for your friend to say, I don't really like doing that. And that helps us understand each other better, doesn't it? So I have some friends who are going to help me act out some skits a little bit, just to give some examples. And we're going to pretend, you have to put your thinking caps on a little bit, that these grownups who are helping me are kids. And I'm a grown-up. Okay? So, Sunny, would you like to come join us today? She's not even having to say anything with her words. What is she saying with her body? Anybody want to tell me?
She doesn't want to be a part of the skit.
She doesn't want to participate. She doesn't want to be part of that, right? So what some of the ways people can cross their arms, they can look away. What if I was trying to engage my friend Susan over here, and Susan starts to hide behind her grown-up? Should I keep trying to talk to Susan? No. Yeah, she feels uncomfortable. She might feel a little shy. I'm going to let you have some space, Susan. You're welcome. What if my friend Stephen was sharing a secret with me.
Perfect.
Whoa, can I share that with them?
Yeah.
I asked if I could share that because Stephen whispered that to me because he didn't want everybody to hear. He might have been feeling a little shy. And sometimes he just wants me to know something like, please don't call on me. I don't want to participate today. And sometimes he might be wanting to say something, but he doesn't feel comfortable telling everybody. So I can share his secret because he said yes. Last week, one of my little friends, and one of the times we were talking, said, no, I cannot tell people. And that was really brave of them to do that. And I said, okay, I respect your secret. And what if I came up to my friend Nicole and I said, I'm so excited to would you like to go play with me? Yes. Did you see her body language? Right? She matched my energy. She was excited and we started to go. Do I have her consent? Yes. And so now Nicole and our friends, we're going to go outside to go to our classes today, okay? Let's go. Walking feet, walking feet.
So as some of you know, I am Jewish and was Orthodox for about 10 years in my 20s. Jewish law dictated that as an unmarried Orthodox woman, I was not allowed to even touch anyone I was dating. Judaism has a very positive attitude towards sex, but only after marriage. So my life at the time had a lot of religion and spirituality, but no sex. Then, after a lot of things happened, and I decided to no longer be Orthodox, the equation shifted. And I wasn't so focused on spirituality, but I met my future husband, Adam. And well, let's just say we weren't following those laws about not touching people you're dating. So, looking back, I wonder, does the equation have to shift? Do sexuality and spirituality have to be on opposite ends of the spectrum? Do you have to give up one to have the other? Is not the combination of the two more powerful than either of them would be apart? In the words of Judith Plaskow, when we touch the place in our lives where sexuality and spirituality come together, we touch our wholeness and the fullness of our power, and at the same time, our connection with a power larger than ourselves. We often speak of a dichotomy between sexuality and spirituality, between the physical and the spiritual, between the body and the soul. But I think we sometimes focus too heavily on this distinction. Experiences are deeper when we bring our whole selves. When we realize that, while it is convenient to put our characteristics into boxes, in a human being, the lines are all blurred. The physical and the spiritual exist on a continuum, two parts of the same whole. And neither of those parts is bad or wrong. One does not dilute the other. While commenting on the sexually graphic biblical book Song of Songs, Orthodox Rabbi Shmuley Boteach, author of the book Kosher Sex, tells us that life loses its magic when it loses its eroticism. That thirsty desire to uncover the mystery of all life has to teach us is noticeably absent from our being. It is undeniable that the metaphor chosen by the Bible in Song of Songs to convey these religious insights is that of a highly erotically charged relationship between two people. God is a burning, raging, vibrant inferno. Moses encounters God in a burning bush. The Jews are led through the wilderness of Sinai by a pillar of fire. And in our relationship with God and with all things outside us, we need to find passion. The Song of Songs challenges us to feel for God and life what two people feel for each other in the heat of passion. When we infuse our spiritual experiences with physical pleasure, and our physical experiences with spirituality, we create space for the complicated, sometimes messy, but beautiful complexity that is being human. Our first reading is some excerpts from Uses of the Erotic as Power by Audre Lorde. There are many kinds of power, used and unused, acknowledged or otherwise. The erotic is a resource within each of us that lies in a deeply female and spiritual plane, firmly rooted in the power of our unexpressed or unrecognized feeling. As women, we have come to distrust that power, which rises from our deepest and non-rational knowledge. For the erotic is not a question only of what we do, it is a question of how acutely and fully we can feel in the doing. Of course, women so empowered are dangerous. As women, we need to examine the ways in which our world can be truly different. When I speak of the erotic, then, I speak of it as an assertion of the life force of women. The erotic is the nurturer or nursemaid of all our deepest knowledge. This is one reason why the erotic is so feared and so often relegated to the bedroom alone, when it is recognized at all. For once we begin to feel deeply all the aspects of our lives, we begin to demand from ourselves and from our life pursuits that they feel in accordance with that joy which we know ourselves to be capable of. We have been raised to fear the yes within ourselves, our deepest cravings. Recognizing the power of the erotic within our lives can give us the energy to pursue genuine change within our world.
Our second reading is a series of excerpts from a book called Erotic Justice, A Liberating Ethic of Sexuality by Marvin Ellison. Liberalism's strength is its placement of human freedom at the core of theological vision. However, liberalism has limitations that have to date prevented the development of an adequate social ethic of sexuality. First, liberal social theory splits public and private life. Justice, it says, belongs to the public ordering of social, political, and economic power relations. Love, politically and effectual and reduced to an affective sentiment, is restricted to private matters among intimates in a separate, autonomous, interpersonal sphere. The private is sealed off from the public, the personal from the social. Second, liberalism leaves in place a patriarchal split between thinking and feeling, a gender-based dichotomy in which feeling associated with women and things female is devalued, while rationality and abstract reasoning associated with men and things male is prized. Although liberalism professes to value human dignity, its tendency towards individualism places self-regard and other regard in tension, forever in opposition. Their irreconcilable conflict, liberalism conjectures, can be resolved only by a selfless altruism or, when necessary, self-denial. Contrary to liberal fears, valuing of self and valuing of others are not mutually exclusive, antagonistic options, but rather reciprocal, fully interdependent possibilities. Doing justice in a liberation perspective is a remarkable pathway for deepening love. This morning, we continue our series on gender and sexuality and the ways these important parts of our identities shape our lives. Last week, we explored the sacredness and worthiness of every body, lifting up that every body is unique, beautiful, and whole. And as the refrain went, that bodies are cool. No matter the self-loathing or comparison or imperfectness society or family or so-called friends place upon you to alter you and your understanding of yourself, we as Unitarian Universalists affirm your body and who you are just as you are. In many respects, this service is a direct continuation of last week's service, which you can watch on our YouTube channel, I have to say, listen to as a podcast, or read on my blog. Whereas last week affirmed the inherent goodness of our bodies, this morning I wish to unpack with the time we have remaining how we might understand the purpose of our bodies. Like, why do we have them? Not just that they are good, but wondering what are they good for? To do this, we will bring together two words that often do not speak to one another, or at the very least, rarely at 10 a.m. on a Sunday morning. I'm referring to what we might call the two S words, like some swear words or pejoratives. Many feel it may not be appropriate to utter them out loud. These two, as I'm sure you have caught on by now, are the words sex and spirituality. Now, regardless of the conjugation of the words sex, sexuality, spirit, spirituality, many liberal religious people, including Unitarian Universalists, have struggled at times to consider whether or how these topics can be explored in community. And yet, spirituality and sexuality, whether you're an atheist, humanist, theist, Buddhist, pagan, etc., are central to the human experience, just like the necessities of human connection, embrace, kindness, affection, and intimacy. Like I mentioned last week, while some tend to avoid the pressures of diet culture, social media, influencers, and the like, in reality, there is nowhere we can turn where those critical elephants in the room are not present and impactful. Similarly, sexuality and spirituality may or may not be your first topics of conversation when catching up with an old friend over coffee, or what you might imagine a sermon series to be about. However, they are both as ever present as the air that surrounds us. The air that surrounds us. It reminds me of the iconic John Paul Young song from the late 1970s, Love is in the Air. You know that one? It's like, love is in the air, everywhere I look around. Okay, I won't sing the whole thing. The song today may be viewed more superficially or saccharine, but the lyrics are pretty good. It's catchy. Seriously, I think they hold up. Here are a few. Love is in the air, everywhere I look around. Love is in the air, every sight and every sound. And I don't know if you're an illusion. I don't know if I see it true, but you're something that I must believe in, and you're there when I reach out to you. Love is in the air. Love is in the air around this time each February due to the overly commercialized near national holiday of Valentine's Day. Whether you take in a deep breath or you hold your breath, this annual marking of love is unavoidable. Personally, I like Valentine's, not because of the commercial aspects, but because it is one of the few holidays where we outwardly are invited, at least, to discuss and express love. It might not seem all that revolutionary to celebrate Valentine's Day, but its origins may beg to differ. Saint Valentinus was believed to be, back in those days, a doctor who then became a priest in the 3rd century CE. The emperor at the time, Claudius II, decided to ban marriages altogether because he felt that it would make men less distracted and be better soldiers. Well, there you go. Valentinus went against classic. Valentinus blaming men's deficiencies and problems on women. The story sometimes changes, but not always. So Valentinus went against the will of the emperor, long story short, and began officiating wedding ceremonies in secret. And as you might imagine, that didn't go over well, and Valentinus was imprisoned and eventually beheaded, hence Saint Valentinus. I find it interesting how the namesake of Valentine's Day went against the powers that be to uphold the importance of love. In a modern context, that would expand, in my opinion, beyond the importance of marriage alone, but to connection, intimacy, and sexuality in general. In the face of opposition, Valentinus and all of us, in truth, are choosing to celebrate love over violence and isolation. Speaking of celebrating love, our mission statement situates love as an act of hope and courage. Our mission, our purpose as a community of hope and courage is to celebrate love and work for justice. Okay, love, we get it. Nick, what about the sex? I heard there was going to be a talk about sexuality. Where is it? When do we get to the good stuff? Sorry, I wrote in some of these notes. Well, you know, our dominant culture makes that transition in the sermon just a little bit harder than you might imagine. But our second reading does get us there, by Marvin Ellison, who explains why. In his remarkably still relevant, although a little bit outdated 1996 book, Erotic Justice, A Liberating Ethic of Sexuality, which I read almost 15 years ago, articulates the challenges of sexuality for religious liberals. As I have spoken about before, Ellison argues that freedom is the central value of liberalism. However, the emphasis on freedom rather than love or justice, for example, leads to liberalism segmenting the private life and public life of individuals, and it promotes a binary and patriarchal notion of each, namely that intellectualism is the ideal and associated with men, and emotionality is devalued and seen as the feminine side. We'll come back to this last point in a second, but Ellison also writes that due to liberalism's focus on individualism, quote, it places self-regard and other regard in tension, forever in opposition. Their irreconcilable conflict, liberalism conjectures, can be resolved only by a selfless altruism, or when necessary, by self-denial, end quote. Okay. Now we are getting somewhere. Self-denial, selflessness, hyper-intellectualism, disembodied rationalism. Whew, this is good. Ellison, in a few paragraphs, shines a spotlight, a vulnerable spotlight, on the way we have a general tendency to not only separate sexuality and spirituality, but also perhaps remove them from having any presence or value in our community altogether. But these things are changing and really have been for some time. After all, both society and Unitarian Universalism has changed a lot since Ellison wrote his book nearly 30 years ago. Spirituality has always been a complicated topic within the highly rational and increasingly humanistic religion of Unitarian Universalism. Sexuality aside, UUs can struggle to even make space for spirituality in our congregations. And some of this has changed. Some of this has changed, or at least sparked, a larger conversation in the aftermath when our then UUA president of the association, the Reverend Bill Sinkford, delivered a speech on what he called, quote, the language of reverence, end quote. What has since has transformed into a book with additional authors, and published in that book in 2004. The book aimed to respond to the widespread conversation in UU religious communities at the time in a way seeking to address this question. Are we talking about religion in a way adequate to our needs as a religious community? Are we talking about religion in a way adequate to our needs as a religious community? And you might also say, are we talking about sexuality in a way adequate to our needs as a religious community? A language of reverence allows for additional language of supplement, to supplement our overtly and preferential, sometimes humanistic and rationalistic orientation. Now, 20 years after that article, or after that speech was given, UU congregations have gained a wider vocabulary for how we talk about our religion, our communities, and each of our personal journeys. Sexuality, likewise, has had a long and winding journey within Unitarian Universalism. However, in many respects, discourse around sexuality has been more approachable in the past century compared to spirituality. As mentioned earlier in this series of services, as mentioned earlier, this sermon series, is complemented by weekly one-off sessions offering sexuality education for different age groups in our congregations, including adults. It's under the umbrella of OWL, or Our Whole Lives. OWL has been in development and in continued revision and expansion since the early 1970s, when it was originally called AYS, or About Your Sexuality. Today, OWL, the successor to AYS, offers developmentally age-appropriate curriculum for grades kindergarten and first grade, 4th through 6th, 7th through 9th, and 10 through 12. And there have also been, in the last decade, curriculum created for young adults and older adults. In an article published in 2011 in the UU World magazine, conservative estimates suggested that over 200,000 young people had been shaped by the science-backed comprehensive sexuality education program. And that was in 2011. In that article, there was also a quote that I think will help us turn the corner towards the finish line of this sermon. One of the most prominent UU theologians of the 20th century, James Luther Adams, wrote in an interview in, of all places, Playboy magazine. He said, quote, "I prefer to appeal to what I believe is an authentic conception of love, an abiding affection that carries with it responsibility and respect for the other person in the context of a community." 1967. This authentic conception of love that Adams valued was not longed for in a vacuum, but with the backdrop of the United States justice movements of the 1950s and 60s and since. Sexual liberation, women's liberation, and LGBTQ plus liberation, all of which are ongoing, were coming center stage. Inspired by the civil rights movements of the era, these efforts faced their own resistance from society's patriarchal, misogynistic, homophobic, and transphobic undercurrents. One of the most critical voices of this era was that of the late Audre Lorde. She describes herself as Black, lesbian, mother, warrior, poet. Audre Lorde was indeed a Black, lesbian, mother, warrior, poet. Audre Lorde has inspired countless people to this day to not expect their dignity to be granted, but to demand it. And perhaps her most influential writing, which Leslie offered some excerpts from this morning, speaks to the intersection of sexuality and spirituality. Lorde articulates an understanding of what she calls the erotic. At its essence, the erotic is deep, primordial. It is a powerful life force. This power, or the erotic, in Lord's estimation, quote, is a resource within each of us, that lies in a deeply female and spiritual plane, firmly rooted in the power of our unexpressed and unrecognized feelings. Counter to the prevailing emphasis of male intellectualism, this deeper knowledge is powerful and dangerous. Lord calls on women, and later writers have expanded this to all those genders breaking free from patriarchy, to dare to tap into a power that is found through pleasure, connection, vulnerability, and compassion. However, the forces of patriarchy and sexual repression, not the least of which has been proliferated by conservative Christianity, are fierce in the face of alternative ways of being. Lord writes, quote, "This is one reason why the erotic is so feared and so often relegated to the bedroom alone when it is recognized at all. For once we begin to feel deeply all the aspects of our lives, we begin to demand from ourselves and from our life pursuits that they feel in accordance with that joy which we know ourselves to be capable of." Let me say that last part again. Lord argues, quote, "Once we begin to feel deeply all the aspects of our lives, we begin to demand from ourselves and from our life pursuits that they feel in accordance with that joy which we know ourselves to be capable of." The joy which we know ourselves to be capable of. Joy. There's more joy somewhere. And keep on till we find it, we sing. There's more joy somewhere. We are capable of it. Celebration is a remembering of the love we have already known, or the bone-deep wisdom that it is present and surrounds us in this community. The depth of feeling and knowledge we might experience in this space and in this life is immense. If, and this is a big if, we are willing to be open to such a journey. We have, throughout millennia, across cultures, closed parts of ourselves off to the fullness of human experience. In our own lives, events or culture or trauma may have given us good reason to turn away from either sexuality or spirituality. But whether through sexuality or spirituality, whether through the erotic or the spirit, or whether through the thread that weaves the two together, our capacity for living, let alone liberating in this lifetime, is dependent on such engagement. As UUs, we are often more comfortable to focus on the work of justice, the oppression faced by historically marginalized communities within and beyond the congregation. And as such, we can sometimes unconsciously see justice on the one hand and personal exploration of sexuality and spirituality on the other as sort of an either or fork in the road. Audre Lorde cautions us against such a self-defeating distinction. Says, contrary to liberal fears, valuing of self and valuing of others are not mutually exclusive, antagonistic options, but rather reciprocal, fully interdependent possibilities, end quote. And as Marvin Ellison says, quote, "Doing justice in liberation perspective is a remarkable pathway for deepening love." Is it possible that through the work of justice, we can come to know love on a deeper level? Could it be true that the liberation of one has an inextricable link to the liberation of all? Would you imagine, just for a moment, what our lives, community, and world would look like and how we would treat ourselves and one another if we found peace in the understanding that our sexuality, spirituality, and bodies, if we found peace in the understanding that our sexuality, spirituality, and bodies were worthy of love and attention, pleasure and care, connection and embrace. It's hard to imagine such a world where we are collectively so free to be who we are. But that doesn't mean such a world is not possible. One way we can help build such a world is to not avoid the S words and make room for them in this sanctuary and in this community. For when we make room for not only differences of human identity and experience in this place, but the greater wholeness and fullness of all of our lives, the world is made just a little more free. Indeed, in that open embrace of our fullness, we may each feel a deepening joy within, among, and beyond us in this life. May it be so, and amen.